The morning mist clung to the stone walls of Windsor Castle like a warning. Sergeant James Thornton had served the royal family for 12 years, but something about this day felt different. His boots echoed against the ancient corridors as he made his rounds, checking every shadow, every corner. The air tasted metallic, cold. At 6:15, his radio crackled to life.
Ow.
Thornton, situation developing. Princess Anne's motorcade route has been compromised. Redirect to secondary protocol. His pulse quickened. In all his years of service, protocol changes were rare. Emergency protocol changes were almost never. He pressed the radio to his lips. Copy that. What's the threat level? Static. Then silence. James stopped walking. The castle seemed to hold its breath with him. Through the tall windows, dawn light filtered weak and gray. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed shut. He touched the sidearm at his belt, a habit born from training, not fear. But today, fear whispered at the edges of his mind. The Princess Royal was scheduled to attend a charity event in London with Catherine, the Princess of Wales. 2 members of the royal family, 1 venue, hundreds of civilians. The security details had been planned for weeks. Every variable accounted for. Every risk assessed. So why had the route changed? Before you continue this story, if you love emotional true stories that reveal the human side of royalty and duty, make sure you're subscribed. You won't want to miss how this unfolds. James moved quickly through the castle's east wing. His mind ran through scenarios. Bomb threat. A suspicious package. Credible intelligence. None of it made sense at this hour. If there was real danger, alarms would be sounding. Staff would be evacuating. But the castle remained eerily quiet. He reached the security command center and pushed through the heavy door. Inside, 3 monitors glowed in the darkness. His colleague, Officer Sarah Chen, sat hunched over a keyboard, her face tight with concentration. "Sarah, what's going on?" She didn't look up. Her fingers flew across the keys. Anonymous tip came in 20 minutes ago. Caller knew details about the motorcade. Specific details. Route, timing, vehicle order. She finally met his eyes. Details only someone on the inside would know. James felt his stomach drop. An inside threat was the nightmare scenario. It meant someone they trusted, someone who wore the same uniform, who took the same oath, had turned. Have we identified the source? Working on it. But Sarah's voice dropped to almost a whisper. The tip specifically mentioned Princess Anne and Princess Catherine, ill by name. Said today would be, quote, a day the nation remembers. Those words hung in the air like smoke. A day the nation remembers. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. James pulled out his phone and scrolled to the protected contact list. His duty was clear. But as his thumb hovered over the emergency line, another thought struck him cold. What if the caller wanted them to change the route? What if the real trap was waiting at the secondary location? Outside, the sky darkened as clouds rolled in from the east. Thunder rumbled in the distance. And somewhere in the castle, a clock began to chime the hour. Time was running out. James made the call. 3 rings, then a crisp voice answered. "Command, Thornton here. We need to halt the motorcade until we verify the secondary route. The princesses are already en route. A-2 secondary pickup, 8 minutes." His blood went cold. They were already moving. Already vulnerable. "I'm recommending we pull them back to the castle. We don't know if Sergeant." The voice cut through his words like ice. "The decision has been made. Your job is to secure the perimeter. Are we clear?" James wanted to argue. Wanted to shout that something was wrong, that his instincts were screaming danger. But years of discipline won out. "Crystal clear, sir." He ended the call and turned to Sarah. "Pull up the traffic cameras along the secondary route. Every single one." She was already typing. On it, the monitors flickered to life, showing grainy footage of London streets. Cars moved like ants through the morning rush. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. But James had learned long ago that danger rarely announced itself with sirens and flashing lights. It hid in the ordinary, in the expected, In the mundane details, everyone else overlooked. There, Sarah pointed to the bottom right screen. Black van. No plates. Parked outside the venue for the past 40 minutes? James leaned closer. The van sat idle in a loading zone, hazard lights blinking. To any casual observer, it was just another delivery vehicle. But delivery drivers didn't park for 40 minutes. They unloaded and moved on. Can you get a closer angle? Sarah switched cameras. The new view showed the van's front windshield. Two figures sat inside, unmoving, waiting. Run the vehicle through the database. Her fingers danced across the keyboard. Seconds ticked by. James felt sweat forming at the back of his neck, despite the cool air. On another monitor, he could see the Royal Motorcade approaching. 3 black Range Rovers moving in formation. Perfect targets. It's no match, Sarah said quietly. The van doesn't exist in any registered database. It's a ghost. James grabbed his radio. All units, we have a potential hostile vehicle at the venue. Black van, no plates, 2 occupants. I need eyes on that van now.
Oh.
Voices crackled back, confirming receipt of the message. But would they get there in time? On the screen, the motorcade turned onto the street leading to the venue. James could make out the lead vehicle, the security detail inside scanning windows and rooftops. They were good, well-trained, but they were looking for the wrong threat. They were focused on buildings and crowds, not on a van that had been waiting patiently in plain sight. Sarah, notify local police. I want that van surrounded, already on it. But even as she spoke, something happened that made James's heart stop. The van's lights turned off. The engine started. And slowly, deliberately, it began to pull out of the loading zone, directly into the path of the motorcade. No, no, no. James grabbed his phone, dialing the lead vehicle's direct line. It rang once, twice. On the screen, the van accelerated 3 rings. The motorcade was seconds away from intersection. 4 rings. Answer the phone, James whispered through clenched teeth. On the monitor, the van ran a red light, tires screeching. Pedestrians jumped back. The lead Range Rover swerved, brakes flashing red. The second vehicle, the one carrying Princess Anne and Princess Catherine, swung wide to avoid collision. Then everything happened at once. The van's side door flew open. 3 figures in dark clothes jumped out, moving with military precision. They weren't running away. They were running toward the motorcade, and in their hands, James saw the unmistakable shape of weapons. But they weren't aiming at the vehicles. They were aiming at the crowd. Sarah gasped. James, this isn't an assassination. It's a massacre. It was already running. Through the command center door, down the corridor, his boots pounding against stone. He knew he was too far away. Knew he couldn't possibly reach London in time. But his body moved anyway, driven by something deeper than logic. His radio erupted with voices. Gunfire cracked through the speakers, screams, chaos, and somewhere in the middle of it all, 2 women who represented the heart of a nation were trapped in a nightmare that was just beginning. Inside the second Range Rover, Princess Anne felt the vehicle lurch sideways. Her protection officer, Detective Hannah Pierce, was already moving, one hand on her sidearm, the other reaching across to shield both princesses. Stay down, Hannah commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting outside. Catherine pressed herself against the seat, her training kicking in even as her mind raced. Through the tinted windows, she could see civilians running, scattering like leaves in a storm. A woman fell, clutching a child to her chest. A man tried to help her up, then dove behind a concrete planter as gunfire erupted again. This wasn't about them. The attackers weren't even trying to breach the motorcade. They were targeting innocent people. We have to help them, Catherine said. Her hand already on the door handle, ma'am, no. Hannah's voice was firm. My orders are to get you to safety. But Anne was already unbuckling her seatbelt. Your orders don't override our duty, the 2 princesses locked eyes. In that moment, no words were needed. They had both spent their lives in service to others. They had both taken vows, made promises, lived by a code that meant something. And that code didn't allow them to hide while others died. Hannah saw the determination in their faces and made a decision that would either save lives or end her career. If you're going out there, you follow my lead. You do exactly as I say. Understood? They nodded. Hannah grabbed her radio. This is Crown 2. I have 2 principals exiting the vehicle to assist civilians. I repeat, principals are exiting to assist civilians. We need backup at our position now. The response was immediate and loud. Negative, Crown 2. Keep principals secured. But Hannah had already opened the door. The sound hit them first. Not just gunfire, but the raw human terror of people screaming, crying, calling for help. The acrid smell of smoke mixed with the sharp tense of fear in the air. Catherine's legs wanted to freeze, wanted to keep her locked in the safety of the armored vehicle. But she pushed forward, following Anne and Hannah into the nightmare. A young man lay on the pavement, blood spreading from his leg. Anne dropped to her knees beside him without hesitation, her hands pressing against the wound. Her royal training included advanced first aid. She had insisted on it years ago, over objections from palace officials who thought it unnecessary. Today, it meant the difference between life and death. Look at me, Anne told the young man, her voice calm and commanding. You're going to be fine. I need you to stay with me. Catherine scanned the chaos, her heart hammering. More security personnel were emerging from the motorcade, forming a protective perimeter. But there were too many civilians scattered, too many people frozen in panic. An elderly woman stood in the middle of the street, confused and terrified. Directly in the line of fire, Catherine didn't think. She ran. Hannah shouted something behind her, but the words were lost in the noise. Catherine reached the woman and wrapped her arms around her, pulling her toward cover behind a stone wall. Bullets struck the pavement where they had just been standing, sparking against concrete. I've got you, Catherine whispered, her own fear vanishing in the face of someone else's need. You're safe now. The woman clutched Catherine's jacket, sobbing. She had no idea who was holding her. She only knew that someone had chosen to risk their life for hers. Hannah appeared beside them, weapon drawn, her eyes scanning for threats. Your Royal Highness, we need to move. Now. But Catherine shook her head. Not until everyone is clear. Across the street, Anne was still working on the young man's wound. Her hands red with blood, her face set with fierce concentration. Security officers surrounded her, forming a human shield with their bodies. They had been trained to protect the royals. They had never been trained for this. Royals who refused to be protected. Then James's voice cut through the radio chaos, clear and urgent. All units, the attackers are heading north on foot. They're trying to circle back. You have approximately 90 seconds before they reach your position again. Anna's jaw tightened. 90 seconds to evacuate 2 princesses who wouldn't leave until every civilian was safe. She made another impossible choice. Crown 2 to all units. We're holding position. Set up defensive line at north entrance. Civilians first. The response was swift. Security personnel moved with precision, helping injured people to their feet, carrying those who couldn't walk, creating an organized evacuation in the middle of chaos. It was beautiful and terrible to watch. Human courage in its purest form. Anne finished tying a tourniquet on the young man's leg using her scarf. Royal purple silk now soaked dark with blood. Can you walk? He nodded, tears streaming down his face. Thank you. Thank you. She helped him stand, supporting his weight. Thank the medics. They're the real heroes. But as she turned toward the vehicles, she saw something that stopped her cold. A small girl, no more than 6 years old, stood crying beside an overturned stroller. And behind her, emerging from an alley, were 2 of the attackers. They hadn't seen her yet, but they would. In seconds, they would. Anne didn't hesitate. She ran toward the child, her body moving on instinct, on something deeper than thought. Behind her, Hannah shouted. Security officers turned, weapons raised, but the angle was wrong. The girl was directly in the line of fire. Anne reached the child and swept her up in one motion, spinning to put her own body between the girl and the attackers. The world slowed. She could hear the child's rapid breathing against her chest, could feel the tiny hands gripping her jacket, could see, in her peripheral vision, the attackers raising their weapons. This is it, she thought with strange clarity. This is how it ends. But then Catherine was there, running from the opposite direction, her arms outstretched. And Hannah was moving, her body a blur of training and desperation. And from every direction, Royal Protection officers converged, their formation perfect, their purpose absolute. They formed a living wall around Anne and the child. The first shots rang out. One officer grunted and fell, wounded but alive, his vest absorbing the impact. Another returned fire with precise, controlled bursts. The attackers scattered, seeking cover, their plan unraveling in the face of unexpected resistance. "Move, move," Hannah shouted, guiding Anne and the child toward the motorcade. Catherine ran alongside them, her hand on Anne's back, both women breathing hard, adrenaline singing through their veins. They reached the vehicle and Anne handed the child through the open door to a medic inside. The little girl was crying, but unhurt, her small face streaked with tears and dust. "Your mummy's going to find you soon," Anne told her gently. "You're safe now." But even as she spoke, her eyes found Catherine's. They both knew the truth. No one was safe. Not yet. James's voice crackled through the radio again. He had been monitoring every second, watching through traffic cameras, coordinating with local police, his mind working 3 steps ahead. Attackers are regrouping. Armed response units are 60 seconds out. You need to hold. 60 seconds. In eternity, the protection officers formed a tighter perimeter. Hannah positioned herself directly in front of the princesses, her weapon steady, her face calm. She had trained for this her entire career, but training couldn't prepare you for the weight of real lives in your hands. "If anything happens to me," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the street, "stay in the vehicle. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone except marked police." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Catherine said firmly. Hannah allowed herself a small smile. "You don't give orders, ma'am? You just make them seem like good ideas." Then the attackers appeared again, emerging from different angles, trying to flank the motorcade. But they had underestimated the professionalism of the Royal Protection Team. Every officer was a veteran, chosen from elite units, trained to perform under impossible pressure. The firefight was brief and brutal. Protection officers held their positions with discipline, their shots measured and precise. One attacker went down, then another. The third tried to run and was tackled by 2 officers who had circled behind him. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Armed police poured into the street, their vehicles blocking exits, their voices commanding surrender. The attack was over in less than 3 minutes, though it felt like hours. In the aftermath, an eerie quiet settled over the scene. Civilians emerged from hiding, shaking, crying, embracing each other. Medics rushed to the wounded. Officers secured the area, their movements methodical and thorough. Anne sat in the motorcade, the little girl still clutching her hand, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not fear, not relief. Something deeper. The weight of what had almost happened. What could have happened? What they had chosen to face instead of running. Catherine climbed in beside her, her hair disheveled, her jacket torn at the shoulder. Their eyes met, and suddenly they were both laughing. A slightly hysterical sound that came from the release of unbearable tension. "We're absolutely going to hear about this," Catherine said, endlessly, and agreed. "The palace will be furious. The protocol officers will write new manuals. Security will never let us out of their sight again." They laughed harder. The kind of laughter that comes after surviving something impossible. The kind that helps hold the pieces together when everything else is falling apart. Hannah appeared at the door, a bandage on her arm where a bullet had grazed her. "Your Royal Highnesses, we need to get you back to the castle. The area is secure, but we're staying," and finished for her. "These people need to see that we're all right, that we didn't run." Hannah opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She had learned something today about the women she protected. They weren't just titles and protocol. They were leaders. And sometimes leadership meant standing in the fire instead of fleeing from it. "Then I'm staying right beside you," Hannah said simply. They stepped out of the vehicle together. The crowd that had scattered in terror now began to gather cautiously, drawn by something they couldn't quite name. News cameras appeared, capturing the moment. 2 royal women, their clothes dirty and torn. Standing among the wreckage with the people they had refused to abandon, a man approached, the one Anne had treated. He limped forward on his injured leg and extended his hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "You saved my life." I took his hand in both of hers. "We're all responsible for each other. That's not protocol. It's just being human." The words were simple, but in that moment, they meant everything. By the time James arrived on scene, the street had transformed into a controlled emergency zone. Police tape marked perimeters. Ambulances lined the curb. Officers took statements from shaken witnesses. But what struck him most was the cluster of people surrounding 2 figures in the center of it all. And Catherine stood among the civilians, talking quietly, holding hands with the injured, comforting the traumatized. No barriers, no distance. Just 2 women who had made a choice and were living with it. James approached Hannah, who was receiving treatment from a paramedic while simultaneously coordinating security protocols through her radio. Reporter said. Hannah looked at him with eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. For civilians injured, none critical. 1 attacker dead, 2 in custody. All principals are physically unharmed. She paused. Emotionally, psychologically, that's above my pay grade. James watched and kneel beside the little girl from earlier, now reunited with her mother. Both mother and child were crying. Anne said something that made the mother laugh through her tears, then embraced them both. "They went out there," James said quietly. "It wasn't a question. They chose to," Hannah corrected. "I gave them options. They chose service over safety. You could lose your position for this." Hannah met his eyes steadily. "Then I lose it. But I won't lose who I am," James understood. He had spent his career following protocol, believing that rules existed for good reasons, that safety procedures were built on the bodies of past failures. But today had shown him something protocol could never account for: the human element. The moment when following rules meant abandoning values. "You did right," he said simply. Relief flickered across Hannah's face. "Tell that to my review board." Across the street, a news reporter was broadcasting live, her voice carrying on the wind. What we witnessed today wasn't just an attack. It was a revelation. 2 members of the royal family, when faced with danger, chose to run toward people who needed help, not away to safety. The question everyone is asking: what does this mean for modern royalty? James could already see the headlines forming, the debates that would rage, the think pieces and opinion columns, but none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that people had survived. That courage had shown up when it was needed most. Catherine approached the motorcade, her face pale but composed. A Palisade rushed forward with a coat to cover her torn jacket. "Ma'am, we really need to get you back," the aide insisted. "The king has been briefed. The entire palace is in crisis mode." Catherine accepted the coat, but didn't move toward the vehicle. "Tell them we're fine. Tell them we'll return when everyone here has been accounted for and treated." The aide looked helpless. "Ma'am, that could take hours." "Then it takes hours." Anne joined them, the little girl's mother having finally convinced her daughter to go to the hospital for a checkup. There was blood on Anne's sleeve knot, her own and exhaustion etched into the lines of her face. "We should go," Anne said to Catherine. "We've done what we can here. The professionals need to work." Catherine nodded. They had pushed protocol as far as it would bend, maybe further. But Anne was right. There was a difference between service and obstruction. As they moved toward the motorcade, an elderly man stepped forward. He was dressed in a worn military jacket, medals pinned to his chest. His hand rose in a crisp salute. "Princess Anne, Princess Catherine. I served in the Falklands. Saw combat. Saw men freeze under fire." His voice was strong despite his age. "What you did today? That's the kind of leadership we've been missing. The kind worth following." Anne returned his salute with equal precision. "Thank you for your service." "No, ma'am." "Thank you for yours." The moment was captured by a dozen cameras, photographed from every angle. It would become the defining image of the day, a veteran honoring royalty. Not for their titles, but for their actions. The ride back to Windsor was silent. Catherine stared out the window, watching London pass by. Cada, the city continuing its rhythm as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. Anne sat with her eyes closed, breathing deeply. Coming down from the adrenaline that had kept her moving, Hannah sat across from them. Her injured arm bandaged properly now, her face thoughtful. "May I speak freely?" she asked. Both women nodded. "What you did today will change everything. The rules about royal security, about engagement protocols, about how close you're allowed to get to danger. They're going to lock this down tight. You know that." "We know," Catherine said quietly. "And when they do, when they try to put you in a box and keep you there for your own safety, remember this feeling. Remember that you chose to be more than symbols. You chose to be human." It opened her eyes. "They can change the rules, Hannah, but they can't change who we are. Not unless we let them." The car pulled through the castle gates. Palace officials waited in a tight cluster, their faces drawn with stress and relief and barely contained anger. The king himself stood at the entrance, his expression unreadable. James watched from the security station as the princesses emerged from the vehicle. He had served long enough to recognize the signs. There would be meetings, inquiries, heated discussions about duty and risk and the impossible balance between the two, but he also recognized something else in the way Anne and Catherine walked toward those waiting officials. Their heads high, their steps steady. They had crossed a line today, stepped out of the carefully constructed image of what royalty should be, shown the world what it could be, and that kind of truth, once revealed, couldn't be put back in the box, no matter how hard anyone tried. 3 days later, the nation was still talking. Social media had exploded with videos from the attack, each one showing different angles of the same impossible scene, royalty running toward danger, not away. News outlets ran stories around the clock. Opinion pieces debated everything from protocol violations to modern heroism. But underneath all the noise, something deeper was happening. People were talking about what leadership actually meant. James sat in the security briefing room, surrounded by officials who had flown in from London for the inquiry. They had spent 2 hours reviewing footage, analyzing decisions, questioning every choice made that morning. Sergeant Thornton, the lead investigator, said, her voice clinical and cold, "You coordinated the response from Windsor. At any point, did you recommend that the principals be physically restrained to prevent them from exiting the vehicle?" James met her eyes. "No, ma'am. Why not?" The room fell silent. This was the question everything hinged on. The question that would determine careers, rewrite protocols, possibly change the future of royal security. James chose his words carefully, because the situation was dynamic and unpredictable, because the principals were not the primary targets, and because sometimes the greatest security risk is losing the trust and respect of the people you're meant to protect. "That's not protocol," another official interjected. "No," James agreed, "it's not. But protocol assumes royalty are assets to be protected. It doesn't account for what happens when they choose to be leaders instead." The investigator's expression didn't change. "Your opinion on leadership is noted. It doesn't excuse the security failures." But before James could respond, the door opened. The king entered, and everyone stood immediately. "Sit," he said quietly. He moved to the head of the table, his presence filling the room. For a long moment, he said nothing, just looked at each person in turn. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of both authority and exhaustion. "All of them. I've watched the footage more times than I care to count. I've spoken with Princess Anne and Princess Catherine at length." He paused. "And I've listened to what the nation is saying." The officials waited, tense. What happened 3 days ago was a catastrophe, an attack on innocent civilians that should never have gotten as far as it did. Intelligence failures, coordination problems, response gaps, all of it will be addressed. His gaze hardened. But what happened after the attack began? That was something else entirely. He turned to a screen on the wall and gestured. Video played, showing and kneeling beside the injured man, Catherine pulling the elderly woman to safety. Then it shifted to images from the aftermath. Royalty standing with the people, refusing to retreat, choosing solidarity over safety. I have spent my life believing that our primary duty is to survive, to maintain continuity, to protect the institution above all else. The king's voice grew quieter. My daughter and daughter-in-law taught me something 3 days ago. They taught me that an institution worth protecting must be worth believing in. And people don't believe in symbols that hide. They believe in humans who stand. He turned back to the room. There will be changes to security protocols. Better intelligence, faster response times, improved coordination with local authorities. But there will not be, his voice grew firm, restrictions that prevent members of this family from serving the people when they are needed most. The lead investigator shifted uncomfortably. Your Majesty, with respect, we cannot guarantee their safety if no one can guarantee safety. The king interrupted. Not for them, not for anyone. All we can do is our best. And sometimes, our best means trusting them to know when service demands sacrifice. James felt something loosen in his chest. Relief? Yes. But also pride. The meeting concluded shortly after. As officials filed out, the king stopped beside James. You coordinated well under impossible circumstances, Sergeant Thornton. Thank you, sir. Though I never felt in control of the situation. The king smiled faintly. Welcome to leadership. It's rarely about control. It's about making the best choice you can with incomplete information and then living with the consequences. That evening, James found himself on duty outside the private residence. Through the windows, he could see Anne and Catherine having tea. Their conversation animated, occasionally punctuated by laughter. The little girl from the attack had sent them drawings, screwed crayon sketches of princesses with capes flying through the air to help people. The drawings were now framed and hanging on the wall. Hannah appeared beside him, her arm still bandaged, but healing well. Did you hear? She asked. The young man Princess Anne helped. He's starting a foundation for first aid training. Says everyone should know how to save a life. James smiled. And the elderly woman Catherine rescued? Gave an interview saying she's never voting to abolish the monarchy. Said anyone who risks their life for a stranger has earned her respect. Hannah paused. The mood is shifting. People are seeing them differently now. Seeing them clearly, James corrected. Maybe for the first time. Inside, Catherine said something that made him laugh, the sound carrying through the glass. They looked tired but content, like people who had survived something terrible and discovered they were stronger than they knew. Do you think it will last? Hannah asked. This moment of clarity? Or will everyone forget in a month when the next scandal breaks? James considered the question. Maybe some will forget, but others won't. The veteran who saluted them won't forget. The mother whose daughter they saved won't forget. The young man with the new foundation won't forget. He gestured toward the two women visible through the window, and they won't forget. This changed them too. A month later, Anne and Catherine returned to public duties. The crowds that gathered were different, now larger, more engaged, more genuine. People reached out not just to see royalty pass by, but to touch the hands of women who had proven that titles meant nothing without action. At a children's hospital, Catherine knelt beside a sick child who asked, Are you really a princess? Catherine smiled. I'm really a person who tries to help when she can. Just like you will be when you're better. At a veterans charity event, Anne met the military veteran who had saluted her. He introduced her to his grandson, a young man considering service. Is it true? The grandson asked. That you ran into danger to help people? Anne looked at him seriously. It's true that when people needed help, I tried to give it. That's not courage. That's just being human. Real courage is what your grandfather did, serving year after year, knowing the risks, choosing duty anyway. The veteran's eyes glistened. Ma'am, may I say something? Of course. I spent my life serving the crown, but that day you showed me the crown serving the people. That's the Britain I fought for, the one I want my grandson to inherit." The moment was quiet, personal, uncaptured by cameras, but it represented something larger, a shift in understanding, a recognition that leadership wasn't about standing above people, standing among them when it mattered most. That night, back at Windsor, James made his final rounds. The castle was quiet, secure, peaceful, but it no longer felt like a fortress keeping the world out. It felt like a home where people lived who understood that their privilege came with responsibility, that their safety was meaningless if they didn't use it to protect others. In his 12 years of service, James had learned every protocol, mastered every procedure, prepared for every contingency. But the last month had taught him something that no manual could contain. Sometimes the greatest act of protection is letting people be brave enough to care. He thought about the anonymous threat that had started everything. The caller had promised a day the nation remembers. They'd been right, but not in the way they intended. Britain would remember that day. Not as a tragedy, though it had been terrifying. Not as a security failure, though there had been failures. But as the day when 2 women showed a nation what it meant to serve, what it meant to lead, what it meant to be worthy of the trust placed in you. Through a window, James saw a light still burning in Anne's study. She was likely working on speeches, reviewing charity proposals, planning the next engagement. Catherine's light was on too, probably reading bedtime stories to her children, trying to explain in simple terms what had happened and why. They would face criticism. There would always be those who said they took unnecessary risks, violated protocol, endangered themselves foolishly. But there would be so many more who saw them as they truly were. Humans who understood that crowns were heavy not because of jewels, but because of the weight of expectation. And they chose to carry that weight with grace, with courage, and with their eyes wide open to the cost. James completed his rounds and signed off his shift. As he walked to his car, he looked back at the castle. Its ancient walls illuminated against the night sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to assess, new protocols to learn. But it would also bring the knowledge that the people he protected were worth protecting. Not because of their titles, because of their character, and that made all the difference.